There we go. Okay, so welcome to our accessibility and ally workshop. In this, we're just going to talk about some proactive measures that you can take to ensure that your course contents that you're uploading into D2L or that you're sharing with your course are accessible for all students, including students with disabilities. So in this presentation, I'm just hoping to go through and give a broad overview of what accessibility is and why it is important for us at Nashville State to keep in mind as we're designing our course contents and our course materials. And I know that a lot of you are seasoned instructors, and just looking at the participants we have in here, I know a lot of you are already pretty familiar with accessibility and formatting for accessibility. So we're just going to have a little accessibility pre-test to kind of get the conversation going and to see what you all already know. And then I want to share with you 7 key accessibility skills that we've kind of distilled down into just a simple list of habits that you can work into, excuse me, your course development workflows to ensure that the content that you're producing is accessible for all students. So just 7 small little habits that you can adopt now, starting today, and integrate into your workflows that should ensure that the content you're putting out there is accessible and available to all students. And then we're going to get more into the technical nitty gritty. And that's where I'm going to open it up for specific questions related to accessibility and accessible formatting in Word, in PowerPoint, and in D2L. And then finally, as promised in the title, we're going to go through some of our accessibility checkers that can also facilitate the development of accessible content, especially Ally, our newest D2L integration, which can help identify issues with accessibility. So first, as I said, I wanted to give just a broad overview of what accessibility is and what does it mean for something to be accessible. So something is accessible when students with disabilities, this is our official NSCC ADA definition of accessible, that's when students with disabilities can independently acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services within the same time frame as individuals without disabilities with equivalent ease of use. So when we're designing for accessibility, we're thinking about how to make our content accessible for everyone so that no student has to face barriers to access or barriers to being able to access their right to an education. So when we're designing for accessibility, we're trying to be proactive. We're thinking about how we can remove those barriers before they become an issue for students. Before you have a student who has a specific accommodations request. Accessible design is universal. It means that we're designing so that things are universally accessible to everyone who might come into our class. Accessible design is equitable and is very much in line with Nashville State's commitment to equitable access to education. Accessible design also takes into consideration assistive technologies like screen readers. So some students will use assistive technologies, mainly screen readers or other kinds of technology that can assist them as they're accessing digital course contents. And we want to be mindful of that and make sure that the content that we are formatting will work correctly when a student accesses it using that assistive technology. And most of all, we're seeking here overall to just remove those common barriers to access. Again, proactively before they become a problem for our students. So when we're thinking about accessibility, we're again keeping in mind that some students have barriers to access because of a disability. So some students have visual impairments, some students have hearing impairments, and some students have cognitive or learning disabilities that may affect the way that they're able to access and engage with our content. So again, this ties back to our commitment to being proactive. We're trying to anticipate what those barriers might be for various student groups and try to remove those barriers before they come up and become an issue. And ultimately, our goal there is just to ensure that students of all abilities can access our educational content. So, I mentioned that when we were thinking about designing accessibly, we want to keep in mind that some students are viewing content that we put online, if you're teaching fully online, in a different way than other students. They're perhaps using an assistive technology like a screen reader. So I just wanted to give you all a preview of what exactly that looks like, what a screen reader does, and why we need to be mindful of some of the limitations of that software when we are designing our online content. So I'm going to play a video that's going to show an example of how a screen reader works and what it does. Essentially, what this technology does is it will, quote unquote, read a web page and read out loud what the contents of that web page are, often in a very, as you'll see, a very literal, very robotic way. Now, I was told that the audio in this video is a little quiet, so you may want to turn up the audio on your computer just a bit if you're not able to hear it easily, because that's ultimately what we're going to be doing, is listening to how the screen reader would sound to someone who had, say, a visual impairment and could not see the actual contents that were on a web page. So I'm going to hit play. I'll just take a minute to listen.
Breaking news, world news and
Oops.
breaking news, world news and multimedia window, sections button, search button, internal link, list one item, link, end of list, login but settings but list three item, US, link, end of list, heading, list one item, Thursday, link, end of leaving list 12, link, end of list, leaving group landmark, entering main landmark, frame 2, heading level 2, top news, heading level 2 link, U.S. Attorney warns Cuomo on ethics investigation.
Okay, everyone was able to hear that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good.
Yes.
So what was happening in that video, just a bit of explanation. A student using a screen reader will use usually I believe it's the tab key on their keyboard to move between different elements of the web page. The screen reader will then read aloud what the element is. So you heard it say things like link, heading 2, heading 1, and then read the contents of each of those elements. So you can imagine that this can, if a page isn't formatted in a very accessible way, which I would venture to say this older version of the New York Times website perhaps isn't as accessible as it could be, it can be a little bit confusing to someone who's trying to follow along and keep track of where they are on the page. So that's just an example of the kind of assistive technology that we might want to keep in mind as we are designing with accessibility in the back of our minds. So as I said, I know that a lot of you are already aware of accessibility and simply by attending this workshop, we really appreciate that you're taking the initiative to make your content more accessible. And so just keeping in mind that I know a lot of you already are familiar with this topic and may know some things about how to format your documents for accessibility, I just wanted to share a little pre-test with you to see what you know and perhaps start a bit of a conversation about some common accessibility issues that you might encounter as you're putting your content online. So feel free to chime in on the chat or on your mic if you know the answer to each of the questions on the following slides. So our first question in our pre-test, we have a couple of examples of links here. If you could just answer this for me. Which is the accessible named link in this list out of the options? Oh, Amy's already in the chat. She says A. I'm seeing a lot of yes, and A is the correct answer. Does anyone want to share why A is the correct answer?
Will it read that? The screen reader, will it read Anna's Zoom room link instead of just saying link?
Yeah, exactly. So if you think back to how the screen reader worked in that example we saw, the best example of a hyperlink here is going to be A, because the screen reader will read that as link Anna's Zoom room. Now, how might it read B? It's going to say link https://nscc.edu and on and on. And if you have a URL, as you've probably seen URLs that have a lot of random strings of numbers and letters, it's just literally going to read that random string of letters and numbers, which isn't going to be meaningful to the person who is engaging with that content and listening to what the screen reader is reading back to them. C is also not correct. Does anybody have any opinions about why that might be? Click here for my Zoom room.
If it says link here, that doesn't give anyone details about what here means.
Exactly, Amy. So whenever you are creating hyperlinks, you want to make sure that you are giving that link a descriptive name that somebody could understand what it is that they're clicking on. So there's no context around C. Click link here for my Zoom room. Again, it's better than B, because at least someone could probably intuit that this is the link to the Zoom room just based on the rest of the sentence. But ideally, we want to have that we want to have as much description and as much context as possible when we're thinking about accessibility. So A is really the best answer here. You guys are doing great, so thank you. All right, which email closing is accessible from between these two options, and why? B? Lori says, yes, Lori, you are correct. B is more accessible. Now, why do you say B, Lori? It looks better.
Because that's what Christy said. It can be seen as opposed to the other, which is very light, and in someone with visual impairment would be difficult to see that light gray text in A.
Exactly, because the first example does not have sufficient contrast between the text color and the background color. So and B is of course much better because there's a higher rate of contrast between the text color, which is a dark gray, and the white background. You can see it very clearly, and it's simply just more. It's just easier to read on the screen. Yes, Amelia?
When a screen reader reads, does it do anything with colored text, or does it just kind of treat it all as the same?
That's a great question. And no, it doesn't do, I don't believe it does anything with colored text. So it doesn't tell, for instance, the user text color red or anything like that. And that is a really good point. And I'm glad you bring that up, Amelia, because one of the other things you want to think about when you're thinking about accessibility is you don't want to use color to convey meaning, because that information won't be conveyed to a screen reader user or say to somebody who has color blindness. That so if you're if you use color, say to indicate, for instance, if you have a document where you are putting really important information in red, keep in mind that you can do that, but keep in mind that you want to use color in such a way that it's not the sole way in which students are gathering information. So you don't want to like have crucial information conveyed via color, because some students won't be able to access that information or realize that text is a different color than the rest of the text in a document. That's a great point, Amelia.
Thank you.
And I have a question.
Yeah.
I know that our new online class shells, some of them have different contrast colors like red and green. Is that something that we need to continue to do, or is it better for somebody to, for it to be like more consistent with like black or just a dark blue color, everything? Would that make a difference?
Yeah, when you're thinking about contrast and use of color, black on white is generally the best.
Okay.
It's fine if you want to use color, again, just as long as it's not necessary to see the colors to understand what's going on the page, and as long as that color has sufficient contrast against the background. D2L actually has a really neat tool built in. So when you select a color to apply to text in a D2L document, it'll actually pop up and tell you whether that text has sufficient contrast or not. So that's something that you'll want to check in your D2L shell.
Okay.
And a bit of a tangent here, but we can hop over to D2L and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about here. with that color checker. So if we have a document, we want to make the title a different color. You change the text color by going up to this select color option up in the toolbar. And you'll see right now it's dark gray, and dark gray on white or black on white is always the best option, and because it will always have sufficient contrast. So it'll show you down here, we have a check for meeting the contrast requirements. It automatically will make sure that that contrast ratio is correct for you for any color you choose. So if I want to change it to dark blue also works. It's still got a check mark. However, if we want to make it something really light, you really want to stay away from light colors on a white background, like yellow. It'll give us a red X. It does not meet accessibility standards. So there is some built-in information in D2L that can help you make sure that the colors you're choosing are accessible to everyone.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. Lori, you had a question.
Yeah, could I just back up to your previous discussion on color should not be used to convey importance. So for example, if I have a note and I've placed it in red because of its import, if I have in front of that important note and then follow the note, would that be an acceptable way to handle that for accessibility issues?
Yeah. So in that way, you are providing kind of multiple means of accessing that information. By having important note, you've provided textual context around what follows. So it should be clear to everyone. The majority, or a lot of your students will understand if it's in red, it's probably something that will naturally just draw the eye there so that they can see this is important information. But then having in text important note, that will be universally accessible to screen reader users as well, because it will read out important note and they'll know that there is some important information following that. Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a great workaround and really good advice if you're thinking about how to have both color and use color, and if you're using that as it can be useful, but also still make sure that it's accessible to everyone. Okay. Are we ready for the next question? So next question in our pretest. Which list is accessible between list A and list B? A. Yep, Lori, Christy, Maria, you are all absolutely correct. Does anyone want to venture a guess why list A is correctly formatted, whereas list B is not?
Because it's a formatted list versus just the dash, but that's kind of a guess. So.
You've got it. No, you are spot on, Amelia. Exactly right. This is, it's kind of hard to tell just on the screen, but I'll click in the box so you can see. This is a actual formatted list, meaning that this list was created using the automatic formatting tool inside of PowerPoint. So if you all are probably aware, if you are users of PowerPoint or Word, there is an automatic bulleting and numbering list that you can use to create a list. And when you're thinking about accessibility, you always want to do that because that ensures that the screen reader knows this is in fact a list and will inform the user. List item 1, apples. List item 2, oranges. List item 3, bananas. Now, list B is an example of somebody who created their own list by just typing in a dash, or sometimes you'll see people just type in asterisks. And we really caution against that because a screen reader definitely will not recognize that this is a formatted list. So it'll just say types of fruit, hyphen apples, hyphen oranges, hyphen bananas. And it might not be clear to the user that that is intended to be a list. Yeah, Amelia, you had a question.
Yeah, so when you're making this list, I know in Microsoft Word, you can kind of pick the format of the list, like you've got the little circles there. Does that shape matter at all for screen readers?
No, it doesn't, because the element itself, in the metadata for the element, it's just marked as list. So you can use, if you want to use little hearts and stars and or any of the symbol options that you have in Word, all of those are fine because it's just as long as it is a formatted list. Because a screen reader will always just recognize this is a list, regardless of what symbol you have there. Great question.
Thanks.
Any other questions about formatting lists for accessibility? Okay. All right, our next question. We've got 2 screenshots of an example Microsoft Word document. Between these 2 examples, which header structure is accessible? Now, this is a little bit more challenging just because it might not be entirely obvious just looking at these, but this is just an opportunity to open up the conversation. Any guesses on which one is more accessible? B? Yeah, I see a couple of B's, and yes, it's B. So again, it's not easy to tell just looking at this on the PowerPoint slide. There's not a great way to really replicate this in PowerPoint, so I apologize for that. But document B, if you're familiar with the heading styles that are available in Microsoft Word, this document B was formatted using the default heading styles available in Word. So that first line is formatted as heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and so on and so forth. Document A doesn't have any heading formatting, so you'll notice that all the text is kind of the same size, which is usually an indication that heading styles have been applied, because oftentimes heading 1 or the most important title heading will be a larger size, depending on the settings that you apply. Document A doesn't have any headings. Why, thinking about how a screen reader works, why do you think it would be important to apply headings to your documents? Any thoughts about that? Help students to navigate. Exactly. Exactly, Lori. Exactly, Christy. So that students easily know where in the document they are. So headings are very useful because you can indicate what information, it helps you to organize information and to assist in students' navigation through that information. So heading 1 is usually going to be the title of your document. Heading 2, a subpoint or a subsection of the document. Heading 3 is a subsection, and so on and so forth. And if you think about how a screen reader works, that's extremely useful for students because then they can tell where they are in the structure of the document. You may have noticed when we were looking at the screen reader example, the screen reader would read out loud, heading 2, and then it would read the headline, heading 2, and read the headline. So in that way, the user understands that they are in a different section of the text. Now, with document A, that's not going to be apparent as the screen reader is reading out loud. It's just going to read all of this text as being equal and as being a part of the same section. So it might not be clear to the student that there is a section called course description, and that is separate from the prerequisites section of this example syllabus. Does that make sense to everyone? And I have an example of this in Word we can look at as well. Yeah, Amelia, I saw you went off mute for a second.
Oh, I was just going to say yes, it makes sense.
Okay. And we can look at this in Word if in just a moment if anyone would like to see an example of how to apply that heading structure. Okay, our next question. We have a picture here, and our question is, which alt text is effective for students? A, which is just a headset, or B, a golden headset with gold, diamonds, and pearls, trimming the white leather headphones, etc., etc. B, exactly. Now, who has a guess as to why B is the correct answer?
It is describing the image in detail.
Exactly, Maria. B is more descriptive and it provides more context. It actually describes what the image is of. So if you went with A, a headset, the user of the screen reader might hear that and just think it's just a regular headset, just like the one I'm wearing right now. When in fact, this is not a regular headset at all. It is a very extraordinary headset. It's a golden headset with gold and diamonds and pearls. It's quite fancy. So you just want to make sure that when you're writing alt text for an image, which is again just a brief description of what information is contained in the image so that someone using a screen reader can understand what's on the screen without seeing it. You just want to make sure you're being as descriptive as possible, especially if your image contains important course information or important information about a topic that you're teaching. So if this was an image of, say, a graph or something like that, you want to write descriptive alt text so that the student can, again, access that same information that other students are seeing.
I've got a question, Anna.
Yeah, Maria.
And I agree with Lori and Christy and Chad. Yeah, I need that headset too.
Yeah.
But my question is this, because I teach math and I've noticed when I'm loading up my class shelves, for example, we have a formula sheet that the students can use during test time. Well, that formula sheet, it's got formulas in it. How can I make that accessible when it's formulas? Because right now, Allie says it's all red on my document. It doesn't like it at all. So
yeah, that's going to be, that might be a little bit challenging. I may need to get with you one-on-one to look at that. Just because math is often times a special case, unfortunately. But we can get together and work on developing some kind of accessible workaround to make sure that students are able to access the information in that formula sheet. That just may be something we would have to look at together. Would that be okay?
Yes, that would be okay. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, Christy, you have your hand up.
So my students have legal documents, and unfortunately, none of them are accessible because the format that the court requires. What can I do?
Yeah, so that is a really tough question. And I imagine, this is kind of related to Maria's question, is what do you do when you have a document that's been given to you that is not accessible? And in some cases, the solution is to try to recreate the document with accessible formatting, but of course, sometimes that's not entirely practical because I imagine legal documents are quite lengthy.
Yes, well, even then, the court requires specific formatting on it. And if you violate that, they will not accept your document. So my students have to understand the formatting that the court requires instead of the formatting that the Accessibility Center wants.
Again, that might be a special case that Christy, you and I can get together and we can look at those documents to figure out what the best solution for that is. And if it's the formatting itself that's really important, perhaps there is a way to create an accessible guide to that formatting, explaining what exactly is happening in those documents and what that formatting is. But again, that's probably a bit of a special case that we can work together on in an individual consult, if that would be okay with you.
Absolutely. Fortunately, I haven't had this issue with students because none of them needed accessibility for it. It'll be something that will have to be addressed if you do ever have a student that has a specific accommodations request. But if you're, it's great that you're wanting to think ahead and be proactive about it. And we can get together and maybe brainstorm some solutions. Again, I have to kind of see the document itself to see what's going to be most reasonable to try to do with that. But we can schedule some time if that's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Great questions, everyone. As you can see, this stuff can get very complicated when you get down into kind of the nitty gritty of individual documents. I know in different subject areas, it can be more challenging to try to take something and then make it accessible. So, but we're always happy to work with you. So if that case applies to you, feel free to reach out to me or to anyone in online learning, and we can get together and brainstorm some ways to address any accessibility issues. Okay. So our final question has to do with videos. If you include videos in your courses, between these two examples, which video is accessible? Again, it's a little difficult to tell what's going on, so I'll just explain that out loud. In video A, we have a embedded Kaltura video that has closed captioning and a transcript below. And then in video B, we just have a video, no transcript, no captions, just text on the screen. A, yes, A is the correct choice because whenever you upload audio or video content, you want to make sure that you are providing text content to accompany it so it's accessible to those who have visual impairments or audio impairments. So in this case, this video A is a great example of a video that has closed captioning for those who are unable to access the audio portion of the video. They can read the text. Video B is not such a great example. There's a lot of text on the screen, which might be helpful for someone who has audio impairment. But really the gold standard here is including closed captioning with videos because without those, the user won't have any sense of what exactly the narrator of this video is saying. So A is the correct answer. And A is a good example of an embedded, I mentioned Kaltura, which is our preferred integration in D2L for generating transcripts for your videos. It's built into D2L. You can upload videos that you already have. You can upload YouTube videos, as is the case here, or you can record videos straight into Kaltura and it will automatically generate those captions. So you don't have to manually type them or do anything like that. Kaltura can automatically generate those. Those of you who do Zoom recordings, you'll also know that if you record a class session, say with Zoom, Zoom will also automatically generate a transcript with the recording that'll be available to students after the class session ends. So just as long as you're providing some kind of text content to accompany your video, that is the best way to ensure it's accessible to everyone. Okay. Any questions about video? Okay. So just we've already touched on a couple of these topics and mentioned them as we went through the pretest, but online learning, we've essentially put together a short list of 7 key accessibility skills to keep in mind as you're thinking about formatting your documents for accessibility. They are: make sure that you use descriptive names for your hyperlinks, which is, we saw an example of that early on. Use headers whenever possible. So make sure you are using a clear heading structure and applying a heading format to your documents, be they in Word or in D2L, so that students using screen readers can navigate through those. Whenever possible, we also suggest that you use templates. There are pre-made templates in D2L that are formatted for accessibility. And then any of the Microsoft Word or PowerPoint templates also can serve as a really good guide for making sure that those documents are accessible. Whenever you have images, make sure that you are including alt text to accompany those images. If you upload an image into D2L, it will automatically prompt you to add alt text to that image. And you can also set alt text in Microsoft Word and in Microsoft PowerPoint. If you have videos, make sure that those videos have captions or a transcript to accompany them. Another thing we already talked about, make sure that you use formatted, numbered, and bulleted lists. Don't try to create your own list. Use the formatting that's provided in Word or PowerPoint or D2L. Avoid unnecessary spaces. We haven't talked about this one, and it's a bit of a weird one. So what we mean by that is if you want to indent a paragraph, say in a Word document, use the tab button. Don't use the space bar. I've seen sometimes instructors will just press space 5 or 6 or 7 times to create indentations or something like that. And we really caution against that just because that can make the document more difficult for you to edit. And also it creates an issue with screen readers who a screen reader might think that those blank spaces are somehow meaningful and read out space, 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 space. So just make sure that you are using the tab function if you're wanting to create a space in your document or indentation in your document. Number 6, we advise, if you can avoid it, to try to avoid using tables for formatting text. So it's I know some of you, in math or in accounting, you need to use tables because you're presenting data. And that's fine, because really that is the original intention of tables, is for the presentation of numerical data. But if you're using tables to present text, it's generally better to try to, if you can, try to present that in a linear format instead. It is possible to make tables accessible, and there are some guidelines that you can follow to make sure that your tables are accessible. But just in general, if you're using it to just present text, I would suggest instead trying to see if you could use a linear non-table format instead. And then finally, we did talk about this, be mindful of color contrast. So just make sure any colors you use will stand out against the background so everyone can read them. Okay. Now, looking at this list, is there anything in particular here that you would like to look at in greater detail? This is where we can kind of branch out and look at some more specific questions. If you have questions about how to do any of these things in Word, in PowerPoint, or in D2L. What do we do? Christy in the chat has asked, what do we do when other accessibility checkers find no issues, but Ally still isn't green? So that's a great question, and that can lead us into our discussion about accessibility checkers. So what Christy is referring to is, I imagine, is the accessibility checkers that are built in to Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint, really all Microsoft products. You can find that under the Review tab, check accessibility. And this is another good thing to get in the habit of doing, is while you're creating a document or after you're done, just hit that check accessibility button in the Review tab and see what it comes up. It'll flag certain issues and then make recommendations about how to fix them. And what Christy is saying is that sometimes there's conflicting information about what accessibility checkers will return as an issue. So sometimes they'll say, you'll run an accessibility check in Word, it won't identify any issues, but Ally is still flagging some things. So there can be a discrepancy sometimes. In that case, I'd suggest looking at the guidance that Ally provides. So if we switch over to D2L, we can look at a document in D2L as an example. So Ally is our integrated accessibility checker inside of D2L, which will provide, it will flag documents based on their accessibility score. If it's green, it's pretty good. If it's yellow or red, I'll show you some examples of that. If it's yellow, it's not so good. If it's red, it really needs some attention. So it gives you kind of a visual at a glance sense of the accessibility of your documents. So if we see this icon next to one of our documents, you can just click on that. And Ally will also give you some feedback about issues it has identified and some recommendations about how to fix that. So let me find a worse document, something that needs more attention. So for instance, this document, Ally is saying this document contains tables that are missing headers. So that is the main issue that it's identifying. If you click on all issues, it may have identified additional ones. And hopefully for most of these, it will provide some documentation about how to fix that in the original document. So let's start with this first one. This document contains text with insufficient contrast. If you click on that, you can get information about what this means. It explains why color contrast is important. And then there's a button, how to fix contrast. So step one with fixing any issues that Ally identifies is always going to be go back to the original document. So open up the original Word document or the original PowerPoint and fix any issues there. So it's suggesting here, right, to go back to the original Word document and to fix the issue there. What we would do is open up the Word document, go to this text that it's highlighted in red. So for instance, the location, class size, webcam, these are all highlighted as not having sufficient text against that teal background. We go in and then change the text color to black or something like that. Now, Christy, it sounds like maybe is there a specific issue that is coming up for you that Ally is flagging that the accessibility checker in Microsoft is not flagging? Okay, yeah, so Microsoft says there are no issues. What does Ally say? Or do you know off the top of your head? Because it does sometimes happen that there is a discrepancy between the two because they may give preference to certain design issues more than others. Ally does not like the tables included, or Ally gives no guidance. Yeah, that is one frustrating thing that you might run into with Ally, is that you might see a message that says we are working on preparing guidance, and that is the case with a lot of issues, unfortunately, with Ally. With tables, let's see, let me open up that table document again. With tables, the most common issue is you want to make sure that your table has header row defined, and it has an accompanying caption. And I can go over how to do that in Word. Let me switch over to Word, and we can go through correct table formatting. One thing that Ally might not be, or that the accessibility checker in Word might not be catching, is the table header issue. So I've got a table here in this document. To correctly format a table for accessibility, you want to make sure that the header row is defined. So that means that this is the header of the column, because otherwise the screen reader isn't going to realize that grade item and weight in this example table is actually the title for the entire column. So it describes all the contents of the column beneath it. So we need to define this as the header row. To do that, you just select the header row. It's going to be probably the top row of your table. Go up to Table Design in the ribbon in Microsoft Word, and check the box next to Header Row. Now, you may have already done that, and one thing that Microsoft doesn't catch that Ally will is you have to do an additional thing to make sure that the header row is working properly. So right-click on that table, go to Table Properties, and then under Row, you want to make sure that this box, Repeat as Header Row at the top of each page, is checked. And that's something that Microsoft won't flag, but Ally will. And what that setting does is it just makes sure that if the table is on multiple pages, even if it's not on multiple pages, as this one is not, it wants that setting checked so that it's clear that the header row is continuing on to the next page. The same header applies to that column, even on the next page. That might be the issue that you're having, Christy. You might try that and see if just checking this box, Repeat as Header Row at the top of each page, fixes the issue that you're having with tables in Ally. Another thing that you can set while we're in this table properties menu that's also crucial for making sure tables are accessible is this alt text tab. Just like with images, you have to provide alt text with your tables in order for it to pass Ally and the accessibility checkers. So alt text for this is our grading scale, so I might title this grading scale. And then, just like you would with an image, provide just a brief description of what information is included in the table. In this case, since it's a pretty short table, you might just write out in linear text form what the grade items are, what the weight is, just because it wouldn't take too long. or you can provide just an overall description of what information is contained here. Let's see, Christy, unfortunately in court tables, it can't have the header row. Yeah. So, yeah, what might have to happen is that you have the correctly formatted court documents according to what the court is requiring, absent the accessible formatting, and then maybe a second version of that same document with the accessible formatting. And like I mentioned before, perhaps some kind of separate explanation in text form of what's going on in the legal documents for those who are accessing them through assistive technology. Lori, another question. I'm just curious as to why an alt text description is required for a table when the screen reader can read the data. Yeah, that is a great question, because I know that it won't pass the accessibility checkers, which is the main reason why I point that out, adding alt text descriptions. And in my mind, I'm not entirely sure how this works, but in my mind, I'm thinking the alt text description is kind of a fallback, because oftentimes tables don't read correctly, which is why we kind of caution people away from using them unless they have to. So if for some reason the student is tabbing through this table, it doesn't make sense. The alt text description can kind of provide a backup there. Though you're right, Lori, what will happen is if someone's using a screen reader, they're tabbing through the table, it will read header row, grade item, header, and then all the items in that column, header row, rate, all the percentages in that column. So it should read the data out loud to them, and because it explains this is the header row, it's understood that everything that follows that is a part of that column. But it is good to just have multiple explanations, multiple sources of context in general when you're thinking about accessibility, and that alt text description can provide just another source of information. Yeah. Okay. Keep the questions coming. Happy to look at anything specific that you might have. While we're in this Word document, I did just want to point out how to apply header structure to a Word document, which is something we mentioned before, for those who are not familiar with doing that. So right now, this document is not formatted with headers, as you can probably tell, because like we saw in the example earlier, all the text is kind of the same size. There isn't really a strong distinction between different sections. If you're wanting to apply headers to a document, in Word, you'll go to the Styles ribbon up at the top, and you always want to start with heading 1. So let's say I want to make Nashville State Community College, Social and Behavioral Sciences History. That's heading 1, because that's essentially the title of the document. Spring 2021, Master Course Syllabus. Well, really all of this is kind of the title of the document. I could just go ahead and highlight all of that, make that heading 1. And it will automatically apply that heading 1 style there. So it's understood this is kind of heading 1 under which all other information will follow. We come down here, then we have our first kind of subsection, course information. And most likely we're going to want to make that heading 2, because that's a subsection of the larger document. You'll notice these bullet points are not correctly formatted, so we just quickly make those into a list using the Microsoft Word pre-formatting. Course description, that's probably another heading 2. It's another subsection of the document as a whole. So make that heading 2. Instructor information, that's another heading. And so on and so forth. The main thing to keep in mind when you're formatting with headings is to just make sure you don't skip any numbers. So that is, don't go from heading 1 to heading 3. You always want to go heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 in numerical order. It's okay if you go backwards. So if you have a heading 2 and then you go back to heading 1, that's fine, but just don't skip any numbers, if that makes sense. Okay, any other specific questions or things that we want to look at in Microsoft Word? I'll pull up our accessibility skills here in case there are any particular points that we would like to look at. Yeah, Amelia?
Are you asking for questions specifically for Word?
Yeah, we can do anything in Word or really anywhere else. If you have questions about D2L as well, I'd be happy to take those now.
Well, this was just kind of a general question. I went to a presentation yesterday about eGlass, and I just didn't know if the Accessibility Center has looked at eGlass in terms of accessibility. Is it something that can be used, or?
I really don't know. I unfortunately was not able to attend that presentation, but that is something I can look into more for you. eGlass eGlass most likely has an accessibility statement available on their website because they are a company, correct? So you might just you might go and look for accessibility information that is supplied by that company.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Thank you.
Oh, you know, you're welcome. And I'm sorry I can't provide more guidance on that right now, but I can certainly look into that more for you if you're curious about what some of the accessibility requirements might be for using eGlass.
Oh, I can happily look it up. I just didn't even think about it. It's early, so thank you.
Oh no, it's okay. And since we just had a presentation about it, that's something that we'll definitely want to keep. We'll want to get on our radar as well in online learning. Okay. So we've already briefly talked about Ally, but we can also go through the slides that I've prepared on Ally as well. So as you know, this is just an integration that live. Yes, Jamie in the chat, you can search or request VPATs from companies as well. VPAT, I believe, stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, I believe. It's just a document that oftentimes educational companies will put out demonstrating their compliance with accessibility requirements and highlighting where different ways in which their products maybe are not as accessible. So that's something that you can request from eGlass or from anyone in the chat, if you have publisher external tools or online publisher textbooks that you're using, you can also request a VPAT from your textbook publisher that will outline their compliance with accessibility standards.
Right, and you can. The VPAT is they identify the information, but if you find that they have an accessibility conformance report, like ACR, they have the actual information that's already filled out of like how they're compliant. So there's a little bit different, but a VPAT minimally will work. But ACR is in full detail, just for information sake.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And again, if you go on their website, you can ask for a VPAT, which is a more kind of formal documentation. But if you also go on their website, they'll often have, if you just Google accessibility policy eGlass, it will probably be presented in a simplified form somewhere on their website for you to see. Okay, so talking about Ally, we've already brought up Ally, and I'm sure some of you have some questions about Ally because, as we talked about, there are some things that Ally will flag that don't match what's in the Microsoft accessibility checkers. And then there are also some Ally issues that will come up that don't yet have documentation explaining how to fix those issues. So I actually wanted to point out a couple of those, which are still common issues that we have that you may have noticed if you're looking at the Ally reports on your documents. One of these, Ally will sometimes mark a document as green, meaning good. It might be all the way up to 98 or 98% accessible, but it will still say the HTML content does not have a language set. And Ally doesn't provide any guidance about how to fix that. So I outlined the instructions for how to fix that here on this screen, and then I can also show you in D2L because reading these on the page, it's maybe not as easy to digest here. So there is a fix for that. The HTML content does not have a language set. I'll just show you quickly how to do that. Let's find a text page here. So let's say here. If you go to edit a text page and you're getting this message that it doesn't have a language set, the way to fix that, you'll actually have to go into the HTML and manually set a language yourself. You can access the source code for a page in the toolbar where it says source code. And I've already done it for this page. But if it's not set, it will look something like that. You want to find that HTML tag that will begin every document. Go into just past where it says HTML, space, type LANG equals quotation marks EN for English in quotation marks. And that will set the language to for the page as English, and it will fix that ally issue. However, that can be a little tedious to do, especially if you have hundreds and hundreds of documents in D2L that are all flagging this issue. It's a relatively minor issue because it's unless you're teaching Spanish or another foreign language, it should be generally understood that all of the text pages that you have in D2L are going to be primarily in English. But if you are wanting to get to 100% in Ally, that is how you fix that little issue.
Right. And it does flag it as a minor issue. So if it does flag it at all, you may get 99% instead of 100. And we're not expecting 100%. So
Right.
don't feel like you have to do this over and over and over again. We're just informing you of like, there is a little bit of glitch in the way Ally processes the language and the title set. So
Exactly.
if those issues come up, they're nothing to be overly concerned about.
Right. This is for those of you who are striving to hit 100%, which we by no means require. But if these are bothering you, this is how to fix that. The other issue, well, here, I'll just leave this. The other issue it will flag is that there's no title set. You can also set that here at the top of the document by creating a tag, title, giving it a title. So, and then closing that tag by doing /title. And that will just apply a title to the document. Again, very minor issue because there already is a title to the document if you typed it here. It's just Ally isn't, for whatever reason, gathering that information, but it should be apparent from context what the title of the document is for someone using a screen reader. Any other little glitches or issues you all have noticed in Ally that you would like to take a closer look at? Jamie, I saw you were going to chime in.
Oh, I was going to say Ally doesn't read directly from the page. It reads from the HTML that's implied inside some of these documents. So that's why it flags the English, because it doesn't, when you transfer a document over, that information doesn't automatically get applied through the metadata. So just a quick way to do that. And eventually it will get fixed, but since it's not a major kind of error and everything else, if you're missing those two things, it'll still flag at 99 or 98%. So yeah, no big concern there.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we are at time. I'm willing to stay around and answer any questions, any particular issues that you all are experiencing as you're using Ally or formatting your documents for accessibility. I know a couple of you had some specific issues formatting your documents. I would be happy to look at those. Oh, we've got a couple questions here already. Okay, so Christy, what percentage of our course should be green? So like Jamie was saying, we aren't, in D2L looking at people's Ally scores and passing judgment or anything like that. We don't require a particular percentage. However, we do encourage you all to try to get scores that are in the green. It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be 100%, but our goal as a college is to try to get our Ally scores up into the green or mostly accessible. I know some departments or divisions are asking for Ally scores to be reported, but generally our stance on that is it doesn't have to be perfect. We're just striving to get into the green. You all are very welcome, and I so appreciate, for those of you who have to leave, I so appreciate you all coming out and taking the initiative, being proactive about accessibility. You all had great questions, so I really appreciate you all coming in. If you have anything further you want to follow up on, you can always contact us at onlinelearning@nscc.edu. For those who are interested, we also have a another presentation following after this on D2L gradebooks led by my colleague Heather Ripito. So I'm just dropping that Zoom link in the chat for those of you who want to follow up. And again, I'll hang around, but for those of you who need to go, thanks so much for attending. We're just so happy to have you. Okay, I guess that's it.
Stop the recording.